Welcome to this guided tutorial video that will help you understand how you can start using Magium for your own testing. Magium's purpose is to make it much easier to build automated front-end tests via its intuitive architecture that almost anyone with a programming background can use and that a moderately good PHP developer can extend. There are about 10 topics that we'll be covering in this video. Watching all the topics should take about 20 to 30 minutes, but if you decide to do the exercises, you'll need to budget about 1 to 2 hours. The format for each topic is to first start with an introduction to the concept, which may include a demonstration as well. Discussion of the key points will follow, after which there will be several slides of bullet points that will help you with a quick exercise. The exercise itself is going to be a repeat of the demonstration. There's a couple of things that you're going to need before we get started. First of all, you're going to need an IDE of some kind. You're also going to need to know some level of PHP programming, so you'll need to know how to build a class. You'll need to know what a namespace is, what a class is, what a variable is, and some basic things about how PHP is used. You'll need to have some basic knowledge of Composer, how to install it, how to include dependencies, and things of that nature. And you're also going to need a working instance of Magento CE 1.9 with the sample data installed and the cash on delivery method set for payment. If you do not have any of these and you intend to do any of the exercises, I would recommend making sure that you have these running before we get started. You can pause the video, make sure they're running, and then we'll continue on in a second. Let's start with exercise 1, setting up your environment. The first thing that you're going to need to do is to create a new project in your IDE. You'll need to make sure that you have PHP unit set to load from the include path. You're also going to need to make sure that you have your version of PHP installed and running. And with that, you should be pretty much ready to go. We're going to start by initializing Composer in our base directory. You can download the Composer FAR file directly off of the website and hit OK. At this point, we have a composer.json file set up in our root directory. And there's a couple of things that we need to do to make it work. First of all, we need to set up a couple of auto load settings so that this is going to work with our project. The first is going to be our auto load, and we're going to need to use PSR4. And there are two namespaces that we're going to set up. The first one's going to be called my tests. Don't forget to do the backslash at the end of that. And it's going to go in the directory tests. And my lib, with both backslashes, going into the directory lib. Make sure you save it. Now we're going to go to our composer.json and we're going to add a dependency. We're going to add Magium Magento, which will install any dependencies that need to be installed in order to run it. This can take some time, so while we're waiting for it, we're going to start up Selenium. Selenium server for Magium is going to require the Chrome driver to be utilized. So we'll start by doing Java d WebDriver Chrome driver equals chromedriver.exe, which you can browse Google and find the download location for it. And you're also going to need the Selenium server, which you can browse Google and get the link from there. Download that into the directory and then run both. At that point, you should see that your Selenium server is up and running. At this point, you can see also that Magium is installed, and at that point, we're pretty much ready to go. So some of the key points to note from exercise 1. First of all, Magium requires some level of basic knowledge of PHP and Composer in order to get things running. It will require a running instance of Selenium server. Also, too, that Magium is based off of PHP unit and greatly extends its functionality in order to work with WebDriver as well as run the batching operations that we'll be looking at later on. Here are the steps for running the first exercise. Exercise number 2 is to create a baseline test case that we'll be using in our subsequent exercises. So we'll go back into our project and we're going to create those two directories that we referenced here, tests and lib. In our lib directory, we're going to create a new PHP file, and we're going to call it abstract test case. We're going to give it the namespace of my lib, and we're going to call it abstract class abstract test case, and it's going to extend abstract Magento test case. And that's all we need to do for exercise 2. So some of the key points we have from exercise 2 is that often individual projects are going to have some level of customization. Defining your own abstract test case allows you to do a global configuration for your individual project. So things like different theme settings or adding different libraries to it and things like that. Abstract test cases should extend abstract Magento test case so that you have all that additional functionality that you can use later on. Here are the steps for exercise 2. Exercise 3, Introduction to Configurable Elements. Configurable elements are going to be required to make your application or your implementation of Magento actually work with Magium. There are usually going to be some basic elements that we need to work with in order to just get some baseline functionality going here. And so we're going to look at what a minimal configuration is going to actually look like. So we're going to go back to our IDE here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new test case called Title Test. We're going to give it the namespace of my tests, again, to match up with our composer setup. Going to give it the class name title test, which extends abstract test case from my lib. We're going to create a new test method here that is going to make sure that we actually get to the page and do an assertion on the title. We'll do public function test title, this command open, and we're going to call our first configurable element here this get theme. Theme has a method called get base URL that is going to be used to actually open the browser up. Then we will do this assert title equals Madison Island, which is the name of the default sample set. Now, if we're to run this right now, we would see that the browser opens up, but it's going to go to the local host because that's the default value for that configuration. So what we need to do is we need to create a new configuration file for our theme class. Now it gets a little bit tricky here, but let's take a look at some of the theme options that we have. We go into Magium Magento, lib, themes. You'll see that we have Magento 1.9 and 1.8 available here. We have a class here called theme configuration. This theme configuration file, if we take a look at it, has a lot of different XPath and a lot of different settings that can be modified through the use of the configurable functionality. So in order to do that, it needs to match. We first of all need to have a directory called configuration, and then the pattern that we follow here is namespace followed by class.php. So the name of this class is called Magium Magento Themes Magento 1.9 Theme Configuration.php. So what we'll do is we'll create a directory here called Magium /Magento /themes /Magento 1.9, and in here create a file called theme configuration.php. And what we'll do is we will set the base URL value. If we take a look in our theme configuration here, see base URL being set here. So what we're basically going to do is override that value. So this base URL equals whatever your URL is. Mine is magento19.loc. Now we'll save it, rerun the test, and this time the site should come up and the unit test will pass. The key points of this exercise is first of all to note the purpose of configurable elements. One of the purposes is to separate activity from configuration, because this decoupling allows us much greater reuse across the site, as well as much greater flexibility when having to make configuration changes to work with our own customizations. We also want to hard code as little as possible in the tests. If we take a look back at our title test, we could have just done this command open http magento 19.loc, which would have done the exact same thing. But what happens if another developer is going to use it and they have their own website, their own development website? Or what happens if you're running in a continuous integration environment that has a dynamic URL that it uses? So for that reason, we try to hard code as little as possible. Configurable elements always extend abstract configurable element. And if we take a look at our theme configuration, we go into a couple levels of nesting, and we can see where some of this functionality is defined. The configurable values are going to be included during the instantiation of the class itself, and the format of that inclusion is to go to the configuration directory / namespace, again can have a multiple levels of hierarchy, followed by the class name.php. Here are the steps for exercise number 3. Exercise number 4, Introduction to Navigators. Navigators are generally going to be used to go someplace. They're not supposed to necessarily affect any kind of change in the system, but for doing things like going to an account homepage, or going to a category, or browsing the admin, or going to the system configuration in the admin, going to a specific section in there. Navigators are used for that kind of a purpose. Navigation, but not doing any kind of activity that impacts change. So what we're going to do here is we'll take a look at what that will actually look like. We'll create a new test, and we'll call it Navigator Test. I'm just simply copying from the original title test. And we'll call this Navigator Test. Our command is going to be the same because we're going to the same URL. But now what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to the accessories / jewelry category. So in order to do that, we're going to get an instance of the base menu navigator, which is used for just any basic navigation on the individual site itself. So we call this get navigator. And here's one of the things I think that Magium does fairly well in terms of being intuitive. Most class names are going to have some level of descriptiveness to them. So we know that we're looking for the base menu navigator. And when you do the code completion, a constant should pop up. If it's a navigator, it'll be called navigator. If it's called an extractor, then it'll have one called extractor. If it's an action, it'll have one called action, and so forth. So that is used to do the object, or I should say the class name resolution, so that you're actually getting the right class to do the activity that you're working on. Now, the navigators are generally going to have a method called navigate_to. It may or it may not have an argument that is going to be passed into it. There might be some cases where a navigator is going to have a different name to it. For example, the store switcher navigator has a different value to, or a different method to it. But generally speaking, it's going to be navigate_to. And so what we can do then is we're going to specify the name of the category that we're going to go to. Accessories / jewelry. Save it and run the test. Now if the navigation doesn't work, often an exception is going to be thrown indicating that the test has failed. So some key points on navigators. Navigators are used to go somewhere. They're not going to cause any kind of change to occur. They're intended to allow you to go to some place. Due to the single responsibility principle that Magium is going to be using, sometimes multiple navigators will need to be used in some kind of a sequence. So for example, there's a navigator that will allow you to navigate to an order that a customer has made. So the first thing you'll need to do is navigate to the account homepage. From there, you need to get another navigator that'll navigate to the order based off of the order ID. So we try to make things as distinct as possible so that they can be reused as much as possible. Navigators are also going to be tied to the theme. That's because navigators will often be using XPath in order to figure out which elements it needs in order to do their job. And so XPath is going to be used for that. The XPath is usually going to be defined in the theme, and so the navigator will ask the theme to get a fully working XPath based off of the activity that it's doing. And our final key point is that most navigators will define a method called navigate2 with a couple of very minor exceptions here and there. Here are the steps for the introduction to navigators. Exercise 5, Introduction to Extractors. Now, extractors are going to be used to extract some level of information. They're going to traverse the DOM tree of the browser that is currently in focus, and they'll return any kind of information that is being expected. If there is specific text, that text is usually going to be returned as trimmed, so you don't have to worry about any kind of spaces before or after the text that you're getting. Extractors might return some level of text, but they might also return a list of items as well. So there might be a product list or an order list or one of whatever is on the page that is going to be repeated. Oftentimes there will be an extractor that can pull that information out. So with our exercise, we're going to add on our previous exercise. So we're going to copy and paste the navigator text. We're going to call it test. We're going to call it extractor test. Obviously make the right changes. Extractor test, and we're going to call it test extractor. Again, we're going to navigate to the product page, which is going to be accessories jewelry, but what we're going to do is we're going to use the product grid extractor to get a list of all the products on there. Now there's a product list extractor and a product grid extractor that can be used on the category pages, depending on what the list mode is that's being used. So we'll get an instance of that extractor. Now oftentimes, because extractors need to be acted upon in the test itself, we'll usually assign them to a variable. So this get extractor, and the one we're going to be looking for is the product grid extractor. Again, we have that constant defined there. And then for our ease of use, our extractor is going to be product grid, and that way we can use code completion on there. So we'll do extractor. We will call the extract method. And what this will do is it will extract all the products that are in that grid. We get those products by calling extractor get product list. And then what we'll do is we'll assert that we have a product count of greater than 0. So to sum up, we open up our browser, we navigate to accessories jewelry, we get the product grid extractor, we extract it, and then we get the product list. So let's run it and see if it works. We see that our test has passed, having been able to see that we have all the products on that page. Some of the key points to note about extractors. First of all, extractors are used to extract information from the HTML page itself. They're usually going to return a trimmed text node, which we didn't directly take a look at here, but is generally going to be true. It may return text, such as the grand total of an order, or it may return a list of items, such as the items that are in that order, or a list of products, as we saw in our example. And the last key point is that most extractors need to have extract called explicitly in your code so that it knows when it's time to actually do the extraction itself. Here are the steps for exercise number 5. Exercise 6, working with elements. Elements are going to be any kind of an HTML node that exists on the web page. And so if there's any kind of a div or any kind of a span or li element or whatever it is, those can be accessed via the abstract test case that we had worked with earlier. So we will take a look at this. We're going to add on to our previous test, and we're going to call this the element test. And we'll call it test elements. Now we're not going to use the product grid extractor. What we're going to do instead is we're going to get an instance of one of these elements using a text-based selector. So element equals this by text, and we're going to get the Blue Horizons bracelets. Once we have that element, we will click on it, and then assert title equals, or assert title contains Blue Horizons bracelets. Let's run the test and see what happens. We clicked on the page and went to the Blue Horizons bracelets page, and we asserted that the title contains Blue Horizons bracelets. Now there's a couple of other things that you can do. This time we use just simply by text, which finds a text node based off of a different pattern. So if we actually look at that pattern, we can look at the text element node search, and you'll see it'll look for span, A, li, label, and option nodes based off of the text. That's actually, you can add that in your abstract test class. You can add other elements if you need, but those are the ones that are there by default. You also have the ability to get an element directly by calling by XPath to get the element based off of the XPath value, by CSS selector, and you can also do by ID, which is generally going to be the preferred method for when you are working with your own customizations. Magium internally standardizes as much as possible on XPath. This allows for a consistent experience and consistent functionality across the entire core library. But when you're working in your own individual implementation, generally speaking, IDs are going to be very specific to what you're going to be doing. And so those will be preferred unless, of course, you have to do something that's a little bit more complex, at which point you can use either CSS selectors or XPath in order to do it. But internally, Magium uses XPath almost exclusively. Some key points. Elements are individual HTML nodes on the web page. They can be retrieved through either the WebDriver or the test case directly by using the by commands, by XPath, by CSS selector, by ID, which are both available in WebDriver, and then you have the additional by text, which is available in the test case. XPath is going to be favored for core functionality because it is basically guaranteed to provide the level of functionality that you need, whereas IDs and CSS selectors may not. But for your own custom functionality, ID and CSS selectors may be favored. Now, if you're going to be making a change inside of one of the themes, you're still going to have to follow the XPath rule. But for your own functionality, in the test cases themselves, you can use IDs and CSS selectors. Virtually every action, extractor, navigator, almost any component in Magium is going to interact with these individual elements in some way. So here are the steps for exercise number 6, working with elements. Exercise 7, introduction to actions. Actions are generally going to be used to do or change something that occurs. A navigator is technically not an action because all it is doing is moving from one place in the site to another. An action will usually cause some kind of change to occur. There can be individual actions that simply do one thing, such as clicking on a certain button. Other actions, such as checkout, may actually be batch actions that have multiple different actions. In some cases, quite a good number of actions in order to complete a certain task. Most of the batch actions themselves will have a method called execute that will be defined, though others may have a more descriptive method definition based off of what they are actually doing. So what we're going to do for our exercise is we're going to do 2 actions. We're going to, first of all, get an action that adds an item to the cart, and then the second one is going to be get an instance of the guest checkout action and then execute that. So we'll create a new test, and we'll call it action test. Test action, and we will call this again up here action test. Now the current add to cart action is probably going to be pared down a little bit. You don't actually need to navigate anywhere. It'll automatically do the navigation for you. So we'll do this, get action, add item to cart. But now what we need to do is we need to get a method definition, and this is where the architecture change is going to occur. But you go in to the class itself, and there's a method here called add simple product cart from product page. And what this one will do is navigate to a default category and add that product, add the first simple product to the cart that it can find. So like I said, this is going to be changing, but there will be some backwards compatibility built into that so that if you build tests using this method, that it will still work. So now that we've added the product to the cart, we need to do our checkout. So we'll do this, get action, guess checkout. Again, finding that action defined constant. We'll call execute. And with that, this is really all we need in order to go through the full checkout process of adding a product to the cart and doing a full checkout. So we'll right click in here and hit run action test and watch what happens. Goes to the category page, adds to the cart, then navigates to the checkout, fills out our checkout information, but we missed something. Now, as you can see that because we missed something, we still got an error message that we can use to define this. So as noted earlier, the checkout method that we're going to be defining is cash on delivery. So I'll do this, set payment method, cash on delivery. And what this will end up doing is it'll end up going into the Magium Magento actions, checkout payment methods, namespace, and then it'll find a class that matches the name that's being passed in. So we'll rerun it again, hopefully with some better luck this time. Navigate to our category, add it to the cart, go to our checkout, enter in all the information, shipping, payment method, and then place the order. And you're done. So some key points on this. Actions are usually used to do, which also means change something in the system. Adding to cart, checking off a button, clicking a submit button are all examples of what an action is. Most batch actions, such as the checkout, which we saw, have a method called execute, but others may have a more descriptive method, as we saw with the add to cart. Here are the steps for exercise number 7. Exercise number 8, Introduction to Identities. Identities are used to represent a person who will be doing something on the website. It could be a customer, could be an administrator. With Magento, those are the two typical identities that we're going to be using. Now, you've actually used an identity already, but you just didn't know about it, because the guest checkout, what it does is it has an identity as a dependency as part of its batch operations. And so it's actually already used the identities that we've been working with here. So what we're going to do in this case, we're going to show you a demonstration about how you can use just a regular customer and have them log in and just make sure that they can actually log into the system and get to their account homepage. So let's go to our tests. We'll create a new test called identity test. And we'll call it test identity. Oops, identity. Now what we need to do before we get into this is we need to actually define our entity data. Now there is a default identity called customer, which is used. If we go and we take a look at our identities under Magium, you'll see that it is it extends abstract entity, but it also has a whole bunch of information defined in here. But the identities on your system may be different than the ones that we have in our test systems, and so this is based off of abstract configurable element, which means that you can make these changes very simple. You'll see our email address here is test@example.com, and that you may not have one that actually works like that. So what we'll do is we'll create a new configuration, and it's going to be Magium Identities. And the name of the identity is customer, again based off of what we looked at in the code. And we'll do this email address is our account email address.com, and then whatever our password is. So now what we'll need to do is we will need to navigate to our login page, and to do that we need to get a navigator. So this get navigator account home, navigate to. This one is all about navigating to a particular place, so we don't have to provide any value in there. Then we do is this get action, and it's going to be the login action, Magium Magento actions customer, and it has a method called login, which if we go in and we take a look at this value here, or this element, you see that you can specify usernames and passwords, but by and large you can see that we have that method named login in there. But you'll also see that in here, if the username and password are not provided, which we did not, it's going to get the customer identity, which was defined as a dependency for this action. So with that having been defined, let's run our test. And the test completed successfully. Some key points about identities: they are going to be used to represent people going through the website. If a person is required for the action, then the identity is going to be required. You may not know about this because it's going to be defined as a dependency for that whatever action that actually is. Some examples of actions that have a identity requirement are things like checkout, customer login, admin login. If you actually want to, there's a couple of ways you can change this. You can also do it configurably, as we saw. You can also directly get the identity using the get identity method. Here are the steps for exercise 8, configuring identities. Exercise number 9, we're going to do a full customer checkout, including navigating to the order in the customer area. We have no key points with this one, so we'll just work through the actual exercise itself. To do this, we're going to build on our original test, and we'll call it customer checkout test, and we'll call it test customer checkout. Get rid of those because we don't need it. We'll get our add to cart action, add item to cart, and again we'll get that long method name there. This time what we're going to do is for the checkout, don't forget we have to set our payment method, cash on delivery. This is something that can actually go in your abstract test case. You could do a protected function setup and then put that after the parent setup has been defined. We're not going to do that here, but if you're going to do any kind of global changes, that would be the place where you'd want to do it. So I'll set the payment method here. Get, this time instead of getting the guest checkout, we're going to get the customer checkout action and call execute on it. What we want to do as part of this is we want to navigate to the order as part of our operation here. the customer checkout will log in for the customer if the customer is not logged in. So we don't have to worry about logging in, but we still need to get the order ID. That's done through the use of an extractor. So to get the order ID, we're going to call get extractor order ID extractor. And there's a method on here called get order ID, which if you wanted to go to our constant here, you could go and you could see the method get order ID. Now, get order ID is actually a dependency of all the different checkout values that are there. So if you have executed a checkout, the order ID has already been there and has already extracted that order ID for you. So now what we need to do is to get a navigator to be able to go to our account home. Navigate to, and then we need to get our navigate to order navigator to actually get to the order itself. So this get navigator, navigate to order, navigate to, but because we have some dependent information, namely the order ID, we then provide that in there. Now that we're on the order, we need to be able to prove that we're actually on that order, and so we're going to do an assertion on the order total, basically saying that it's not null. The self assert not null. Actually, I'm ahead of myself. Let's get that extractor first. We're going to be using the summary extractor, which will get the summary information from that order. So extractor equals this get extractor, and it's called summary, and you'll notice that it's in the customer order namespace. And again, we'll give ourselves a little bit of a hint here. It's called summary. The extractor is going to extract, and we will assert not null that the grand total is not null. All right, having saved it, have we set our payment method? We have. So let's run our test. And our test has passed. Here are the steps for doing a full customer checkout, including navigating to that order in the customer area. This is page number 1. And this is page number 2. And at last we come to exercise number 10, where we're going to do a full customer checkout, including navigating to the order in the admin UI. Now there are a number of steps that we're going to have to do here, and a couple of additional configurations that we're going to have to make. So let's take our customer checkout test, and we're going to call it customer checkout with admin order nav test. Most of this is going to be the same up until this point right here. We just want to get the order ID. Now, what we have to do is we're going to be logging into the admin area. The admin area requires an identity. If we take a look, there are a number of different options here for admin. If we go to the identity, you can see that we have some values here. Again, it extends abstract entity, which extends abstract configurable element, which means that we can configure it. Namespace is Magium, Magento, Identities. The class is admin. So we create a new identity here called admin.php. This username equals admin. This password equals password. We also now want to get to the admin area, but the admin area may have a completely different URL from the front end. Often it's going to have the same domain name, but there's no guarantee that the front name is actually going to be the same. So because of that, the base URL is going to be different for the admin theme configuration. So what we do then is we go under Themes, create a new directory called admin, and that will match to the theme that we have here defined for the admin area, which is under Magium Magento Themes Admin, and it's again called Theme Configuration. I'm just going to copy this theme configuration file into there because it's pretty much exactly the same here, except that we go to the URL admin. All right, we've got our identity set up and we've got our theme set up. We've got our open setup, add to cart setup, payment method setup, our checkout setup, as well as the order ID. Now what we're going to do is we're going to log in to the admin UI, and that is done by getting an action again. And it's called login, but this time it's going to be actions admin login instead of the customer login. We call login on it. Now this login does break a little bit of the solid functionality because if it's not currently on the admin screen, it will actually automatically call this command open on its own. So it takes a little bit more responsibility than it perhaps needs to. But it does that because sometimes you need to navigate back and forth between customer and admin area in order to do individual tests. And so it just basically says, hey, I need to be able to log into the admin. If I'm not logged in, log me in. If I am logged in, just completely bypass it altogether. So it takes a little bit more than the single responsibility principle would perhaps dictate, but it's for a good cause. But once we're logged in, we need to get another navigator called the order navigator in the admin. And we see here, our second one here, Magium Magento Navigators admin is defined there. And it will navigate to, again, we need the order ID to run that in there. So we'll right click on here, cross our fingers that none of these items have broken anything, and see what happens. We go to our category, add the product to the cart, go to the checkout, do our full checkout. Having done that, we're going to go to the admin area, log in, and once there, it'll navigate to the orders, find the correct order, and check it out. The steps for exercise 10 come in 3 pages here, so this is page 1. Next up is page 2. And then the final page is page 3. And with that, we have the conclusion of this online tutorial. I'd like to thank you for your time. If you want to get more information, you can go to magiumlib.com. That's where the project home is. If you want to check out the source code, or if you want to contribute back to the source code, you can go to one of those 2 GitHub links that you have there. Magium is the base library, and then Magium Magento has some additional components, a significant number of additional components that are Magento specific. On Twitter, you can follow MagiumLib at MagiumLib, or you can follow myself on Twitter at KPSchrade. Thank you for your time, and I hope that this has been useful, and I hope to see you using Magium in your next project.